Hold on to your biases here. You're about to get them wiped out. Aaron Scott, what a great man. Very successful, and he's taken success to another level, and you're going to find out why in this conversation. His insights about economic systems, his insights about the way our conditioning is influencing us towards not the greater good, and then his thoughts about the inevitability of kind of a revolution in the way that human beings operate. Really an incredibly rich discussion.
So subscribe and support Blast and Compton Cowboys. Tell your friends about us, and get ready for a wonderful ride with Aaron Scott.
Sis, hallo?
Leven.
Bestuur zeker wegen dem.
Joh je iets niet, joh.
Sitaki ubenza, anika sirikie.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
And we're live with another ride. And today our guest is Aaron Scott, formerly a Wall Street guru, and has now slipped through the veil, as it were. And we're going to hang out and find out what the hell that means. Aaron, welcome.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's great to meet you. It was really fun researching this conversation. The more I read about what you've been creating with your podcast, the more curious I got. And I had this flash that I don't usually do with any of our podcasts, but with the idea of making it a ceremonial sort of ritual for the second. Are you okay with that?
As long as I keep my clothes on, we're good to go.
All right. So give me a minute, folks. Everybody just take a few deep breaths. Meditate for a second. I invite you in the audience to just feel your body, feel your breath, connect to your feet on the ground. Notice how the love of gravity is all holding us together. And we ask the ancestors, the four elements and the four directions to help us create the greatest conversation for the highest benefit of all. And so it is.
All right. So wondering, McDonald's fries, yes, no?
Absolutely not.
Good. All right. We're off on the right start.
I have a death wish here. What do you think's going on here? Who do you think you're talking to?
So who are we talking to? I mean, how would you speak about yourself for a moment?
Yeah. So like, I hate the kind of conditioned response where I tell you what I do and how many cars I have. But I think unfortunately we're going to have to touch on that, but basically I'm a guy who has been kind of, neck deep in Wall Street, in entrepreneurship for, close to 2 decades. And I kind of went into my career knowing that, at least when I started on Wall Street, knowing that I had to kind of like push part of myself aside, if you will, right? Like kind of like disregard it in order to perform, in order to excel, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a taxing process. It wasn't, well received. And, on top of that, I had, kind of my career forced me to dilute relationships. I created toxic relationships with people, with myself. And I again, even kind of my closest relationships with family kind of like became secondary, or kind of like, oh, well, I'll get to it when I get to it. It's not that important. Right. And I kind of reached a breaking point maybe a couple of years ago where I kind of like took a step back and I was like, look, this isn't sustainable. This is not working for me. I deserve better, and the people that I care about deserve better. And I kind of want to step into the void. And that's kind of what I did. And just as a kind of qualifier, I don't know if I'm necessarily kind of like a typical person who has had an awakening per se. I've kind of been on this journey for, over probably 25 years, to be honest with you. Even in university, I studied, philosophy and economic theory. I always had a quench for, knowledge, for truth, for understanding kind of why things are the way that they are, why people think the way that they do, why I think the way that I do, right? So, regardless, I did have, kind of an acute experience, about 2 years ago, and I've kind of, been all in, I'd say, for about a year on the back of that.
Are you able to give some description and specifics about that acute experience?
I just kind of, I kind of had a reckoning, and
like, was it a certain day, or you wake up, or some night, or were you on acid?
No, it was kind of over like maybe like a 1 month or 2 week to 1 month period of time, where I just was kind of like grappling with myself and kind of like, talking to myself and saying like, how can you do this, or how can you not do this? And, what are the repercussions, and then evaluating those repercussions and evaluating the, the cost benefit. But it wasn't like a smooth conversation, right? It required me to really, deconstruct a lot and think of the practicality of sort of reintegrating into the real world, right? And accommodating that part of myself that I had sacrificed and deemed unnecessary, or in many ways non-existent, if you will.
So I'm curious about the cultural context that you grew up in. Is there a deep spiritual practice that your parents sort of bequeathed to you, that you were raised in? What's the context for this kind of deep thought and philosophical exploration, if you will?
Yeah, I can't. I'm not going to give my parents that much credit, unfortunately. But my, I was raised conservative in the Jewish conservative guild, if you will. My father, I would say, was the more religious one. My mother wanted no part of it, which I think lent itself to, in many ways lent itself to their getting divorced. And, kind of like my father's, I call them like ritualistic practices sort of overwhelmed, I think, my mother. And I saw, kind of in my father, I saw someone who, I know I'm walking off the plank. I'm giving you guys too much meat at this point.
We're not going to attack you. We're actually genuinely curious about how you arrived at this awakening.
Yeah, sure. I kind of saw my father, and again, I've been sort of always very sensitive, always kind of very acutely aware of things, and been able to kind of intuit and understand things on a deeper level quicker than I think most. But in any event, on the back of that, I saw my father as, again, this person who was deeply religious, but who, in practical action wasn't aligning, right? And I was sort of like, okay, this is BS. So I think kind of like with that experience, I didn't gravitate towards the to the religion for one reason. On the back of that, I don't know if you're familiar with conservative Judaism, but like prayer services, going to temple, it's entirely in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language. So you've got these masses of people who are attending service, 95% of them don't speak a lick of Hebrew. And they're kind of like sitting there like robots going through the motions of these. I mean, the songs might sound great. They might like the melodies, and you might be following along in English, but that just, typically I would look around, people weren't like,
so I want to personalize this a little bit more.
Yeah.
My understanding from what you're saying, and correct me if this is inaccurate, is that whether or not later in life you decided to follow this path, you were literally bathed in Hebrew, bathed in services, and had those initiatory rites put upon you, regardless of whether you were conscious of them or not.
Depending on interpretation, that's fair to assume. Sure.
Yeah. So you exposed, you were there, like you were just describing, you were there experiencing Hebrew, experiencing the canting, all of those things. And that literally changed the vibration in your body as you were going.
I'm sure it did. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Sure.
So we want to honor that tradition. Like, we could talk about what most people want to talk about when they criticize different kinds of spiritual, we'll call them groups, right? But I think what's more important is this shared human experience, that when we're brought through initiatory rites, whatever context that is, whether it's African, Mali, Rasta, whatever it is, something happens to the way we experience the world. And then what I'm seeing in your life is that you followed a path into economic power, and then something in you said, this isn't enough, there's more. Is that accurate?
For sure. And, kind of in that realization, obviously the default setting is to look into what look into my upbringing, look into what I'm quote unquote supposed to be aligning with, or where I'm supposed to be finding this deeper meaning, right? And by the way, it's not even necessarily, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily, I think that when you're looking, at least for me, when I was looking for deeper meaning, I didn't necessarily default in that way, expecting that Judaism was going to provide that, right? Like I kind of knew right away that wasn't going to satiate what I was looking for. But nonetheless, to your point, when you are indoctrinated in a belief system, right, from a young age, you are certainly going to cross-reference, right? You're certainly going to, I'm sure you're familiar with Judaism, but there is a real sort of, I would say, it's deeply ingrained in you that, there aren't that many Jewish people in the world, that, there was the Holocaust, there is a pride in being Jewish, there's, colloquials like, the chosen people are thrown around, which is, great. But, so you really, there's a focus on marrying someone else who's Jewish. All of these things are, again, kind of like taught to you. So, you can't kind of escape that, right? But that doesn't mean that that's where the kind of introspection and investigation stops. In fact, that would be unfortunate if that's where most people's investigation and introspection end.
Right. Well, what comes to mind is the Kabbalah, and really the rabbis who study the Torah, they're notorious for kind of that Socrates hanging out and just digesting over and over and over, because there is no end goal, really.
Yes. Look, what's interesting is that the Kabbalistic teachings, the Kabbalah itself, right, isn't part of the mainstream tradition, right? It's completely separate. I would say the kind of aside from the standard, prayer book and the Torah, right, the Hebrew Bible, I would say the kind of most closely accessible sort of texts would be like the Talmud, or if you really kind of have a chance to dive even deeper, like what's called the Tanya. However, there are, these texts are rife with issues. And I'm just to kind of back up here, I am well versed, and in many ways to a fault, in Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Gnostic texts, Hinduism, Buddhism. I mean, I've made it my life's mission. Again, I've got 25 years behind. So I am, again, I'm not siloed to this belief system in any way.
What do you find in all these religious practices is a commonality that they all hold?
I would change the question to all of these belief systems, because the practices certainly differ, right? And this is kind of like what's remarkable, right? Is all of these belief systems, when you go back to kind of origin story, and you go back to the real foundation of these belief systems, is this like obvious and declaratory common thread, which is that, and they're kind of like tenets to these practices, and things like the idea that everything is connected, the idea that we should be tuning into a balanced way of life, the ideas of the sacred masculine and feminine energies, the ideas that like the ideas that we should find and seek God or source within us, right? Like these were kind of all part of the original teachings. Now, obviously, as these religions were institutionalized over the years, these understandings, the personal experience that, again, all of these belief systems teach, became dogma, became forced to be, fed through an intermediary. The mystic became the priest. The priest became, again, the intermediary to the church, right? So there was, again, these massive rifts, and these happened, of course, over different time periods. But again, it's upsetting, right? When I look at the landscape of kind of like the current human civilization, and you see like these, kind of like delusional people who are clinging to dogma and doctrine and swearing by it, and not really in a, I think, necessarily, well, certainly not a positive way, but in a way that fragments, in a way that segments society unnecessarily.
One of the things I've noticed is that there's this context of conditioning. And we've reached a stage in human evolution where the need for a priest or a rabbi and the congregation has given way to the need for each of us to have a more personal relationship with the divine inspiration and to find our way through and to free ourselves from the conditioning of those things, to find what's beyond the conditioning. My assumption is that conditioning, when it was initially established, was of a beneficial, hopeful type. People thought that if we cared for our flock, quote unquote, and helped them with guardrails, that would ultimately serve us. But now we've reached the point where it's time to take the inflatables off the bowling alley and to start actually engaging at a personal level, right? And so one of the interesting things I find about your awakening and what you've written and what's in your podcast is you've now come to this place where you're actually questioning all of these foundational pieces. What are you finding is emerging for you as new viable systems that, as you've questioned all these things, what do you see as like the thing we're coming towards, the thing we're moving towards?
Yeah. Before I answer that directly, let me kind of address what you referenced with my podcast, and also with my overall sort of effort here. And I do also have a book coming out. It's called The Fifth Evolution. And I'm hoping that it will kind of hit the bookshelves. Although who buys real books anymore? There'll be an audio form. I actually like it. I prefer it, interestingly. Yeah. But hoping, probably like a month and a half, 2 months. So I'm excited about that. But with all of these things that I'm doing, what I really try to emphasize to people is obviously truth, and I like to provide truth and knowledge, right? To give people a greater perspective or a different perspective and a kind of more wholesome understanding of situations that are either misperceived or not fully digested, kind of in mainstream society, right? But what I really try to do is explain to people that, metaphysics, spirituality, divinity, however you want to kind of process these ideas, are part and parcel, but even more than that, are really the undertone of practical systems in our world, of economy, of government, of education, of medicine, of the way we have relationships with other people, of the way we have relationships with ourselves, right? Of our relationship with the divine. So, and this I feel like has been a big schism, and I feel like it's a misunderstood piece of information. That I can kind of discuss why that's happened, but I really believe that as we kind of move across this timeline, as we evolve consciously, I believe that this thread will reemerge as a real foundation in the way that we approach our lives, our day-to-day lives. And by the way, this was the, historically in ancient civilizations, and not even well after that, but this was the way people viewed their life. The spiritual wasn't separate from science, right? And interestingly enough, modern day science, especially in physics, what these are, what these subjects are revealing is again this spiritual, this mystical link to.
There's a convergence going on between quantum physics and what we've been told about spirituality, which was always really limited by our capacity to understand and communicated through metaphor, right? So I get that. And what I really want to start to get to is one, like, say a little bit more about what your book is and why you wrote it.
Yeah. So my book is effectively a blueprint for awakening, on an individual and on a global level. And what I do is I have basically, structured an arc where I highlight some illusions, some really, some main illusions that we all kind of experience. I then dive deep into how the sacred, or our relationship with the divine source, again, however you want to name it, was severed, through real historical references. Like, again, I'm very intentional in making sure that I'm giving all verifiable information, so that there isn't like, oh, like, what's this guy talking about? Like, I've vetted it, God knows how many times. And then on the back of that, I also go through how this disconnection revealed itself in science, through scientific materialism. I go into how these same sort of metaphysical, sort of the same cosmology represents itself in consumerism and the objectification of our reality. And then after that, I kind of take a step back and I explain why awakening is a threat, and how awakening threatens the really underlying scaffolding of our identity. And I go through that and I explain on an iterative level what that looks like, why it impacts our identity, why truth and revelation are viewed as threats. And I talk about what real awakening looks like. I go through it. I identify, explain, just to understand these concepts intellectually doesn't really get you there. There has to be a digestion, there has to be an integration. And then I go into practices through which you can really embody what has been lost, and how you can really reintegrate the sacred, the divine, the true nature of the sacred and the divine into your life on a daily basis. And, I talk about, surviving awakening, because again, you're kind of thrust into this world that hasn't kind of reached a higher consciousness, right? So you have to navigate that. And I provide what I think is a beneficial sort of, again, path. And then I kind of close it all up with explaining what real evolution looks like, and also what real revolution looks like, and what the return to a sort of wholesome consciousness really, and again, I try very hard not to be dogmatic, but really ought to look like from a healthy vantage point. So that's really what the book is about. It obviously took me a while, and it was, I was very intentional in my wording, in the structure, and really doing my best to provide what I think is a lot of complicated pieces of information in an accessible form.
It's really clear that the veil of old calcified control matrices is being disassembled in the modern era, because something new has to come through. And it sounds like you're playing your part in that. You're providing a perspective based on your experience, your insights, and then offering ideas about where we're going to go next and how to do that. But one of the key things to recognize is that these institutions are not just going to fall away without any kind of resistance. Like, we're sort of seeing that in the American politics right now. There's this resurgence of this old way of being that's desperately trying to hang on to the way it controlled and manipulated people in the past. And what's really present is that you can't stop this train. Like, there's this thing that's happening, as not just with you, Aaron, but with Greg and me and other people. People are figuring it out, right? The mysteries are being uncoded, and we're finding out that the source, as you called it, has always been there. It's always been available to us, but there's been this division put between it, these constructs. And I posited earlier that those constructs, when they were originally built, were coming from a benevolent place. But they've taken on a malevolence after eons that are the result of people fearing loss of the structures. Because, one of the Buddhist things is that once you wake up, there's nothing to hold on to anymore. There's no there. The illusion of Maya and all of those things, it becomes really difficult. And if you've had any kind of psychedelic experience, there's this moment where meaning becomes very hard to come by. It's almost like a meaningless universe. And we're meaning-making people. And we will immediately almost reconstruct our jail just so that we have some sense of security. Does that track with you?
I would disagree with you on some points, but
well, go for it. Do it.
Well, actually, that's not true. I would agree with you on what you're saying, but I would add a lot to what you're saying, which is that religion at the beginning was structured to really as a response to fear, really as a response to the unknown. Right, you're dealing with, think about you're dealing with these natural disasters, you're dealing with famine, you're dealing with drought, you're dealing with sort of unseen forces, right? And you're trying to, create structure, right? You're trying to create safety. What happened was you had, you had a deep understanding about the universal laws. You had deep esoteric knowledge that was accessible and available to everybody, And again, going back to this polarity, the masculine versus the feminine, which is, by the way, it's ever present all over the place, not just,
everything has gender according to the Kabbalion.
Right, but also creation takes place with this polarity, right? Like men and women have to, that it's through a man and a woman that you reproduce, right? It's through there's the alchemy of the Holy Trinity, which is, the woman emotion and the male thought converge, through which action is created. And it's about having a balance between your emotion and your thinking, your emotion and your logical faculties that create sound action, which I think everybody, whether you understand this or not, can agree that that's how you want to be living, right? In a coherent fashion, right? And what happened is on an institutional level, the institution, which was first structured to facilitate, to provide access to the divine, mistook its purpose and made themselves what was to be worshipped, right? And in doing so, part of their process, and also in doing so, they cut people off from a lot of this esoteric knowledge. And a sort of main universal theme that took place across all belief systems was the suppression of the feminine force. And the reason that took place was because, you can't control the feminine force. You can't, there are sacred rhythms and energies within a woman that hierarchy and institution can't control. You can't control the menstrual cycle through dogma. You can't control the ability to reproduce through doctrine. You can't control the cycles of the moon, right? So these were threats to institution that was saying, no, you don't have access to the divine. You must go through us, right? You can't make those declaratory statements and then allow this other kind of power to exist. This took place in Christianity with the with the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. This took place in Judaism after the Babylonian exile. This took place in Islam. It even took place in Buddhism, Hinduism, across the board, right? And it was because of the institutionalization. What happened, however, which naturally would happen, is when you're structuring institution, it's not just about the suppression of the feminine. You get the overextension of the masculine as well, right? Where you have this greed, power grab, and effectively, because the feminine force was really this sort of intuitive, deeply connected force to the spiritual, these scientific belief systems, like, again, scientific materialism, worked really well post-Protestant Reformation because it allowed the same tenets. Now, there was a rejection of the order, but it was still following the same metaphysics. It was still following the same cosmology. In fact, in my opinion, it was a more efficient reinforcement because, again, lots of parts of the spirituality aren't, you can't touch and feel it. Still, it might have been well known, but the scientific materialism gave people a paradigm or gave order through ways like, only the physical world exists, right? Consciousness comes from, we don't know, some like hocus pocus process through these physical objects, right? You saw Galileo, he was jailed, right? Descartes came out with his, meditations. This was an acute severing of again, thought, I think, therefore I am. You had Newton. Newton, again, was obviously a genius, but his theories and equations aligned with a perfect method of control, a perfect method of perpetrating this same sort of path that we were pushed on. And then obviously, industrial capitalism, what a great fertile ground where you have a reductionist model. The human being gets thrown into that reductionist model as well, where they look at units, where they're part of metrics in a business structure, right? So that's kind of the framework. And so again, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But the point is, again, that the metaphysics of all of this was very linear, right? It was through the same vein, through the same underlying belief system that these structures and these institutions emerged and kept their power and still do to this day. I know that I think I forgot half your other statement, so I'll just read that.
No, this is
okay.
Go ahead.
These are sort of important pieces of information that, again, most people don't care to look into, but for whatever reason, I've had a desire to really delve deep, and it's about people understanding that their reality and what they believe is the real world, and the way that they're living it is in truth a diluted way of living your life. They are not living in actual reality. They're living in a severed, fragmented existence. And it's hard for people to believe or even understand, but that's actually what's going on. And this is why awakening, to your point, is so difficult, because you are going from a construct that severs you into a construct that welcomes you back into the wholeness of your existence, right? It in many ways, and this is something I make very clear in my book, right? I'm not looking to be some revelatory figure. I'm looking to explain that this isn't about revelation. This is about remembrance. This is about bringing yourself back into what was known, right? Yeah. But my real push is, this is where I've got some stuff to add. My real push is providing people the blueprint, the architecture through which they can easily awaken, or at least try to, and live a coherent life through remembrance.
It's the principle of Sankofa, right? Are you familiar with that? Maybe we remember what we once knew before we forgot who we are. Right? That's the English translation of what is an African proverb. right? The other thing that really fascinates me is this use of the word scientific materialism. It's something I'm very familiar with my own family history because my father's written a lot about this idea, and the idea of the return of Sophia, right? Anthroposophia is this idea of the divine feminine reigniting the spiritual side of curiosity, because that's what science, ultimately science, and its highest level is postulation, formulation of a theory, and then testing the theory and reevaluation of the test, and reframing and growing in a constant way. And what materialism did, scientific materialism did, is it tried to create constructs that were constants, calcifying this idea and fixing it. But the reality is we don't live as a fixed nature. Not anything is fixed. Even this table is not fixed in its nature. It is much more malleable than scientific materialism wants us to believe about it. But just one of my favorite lines as I was listening to you is Princess Leia says to Darth Vader, no matter how hard you squeeze, with the rebellion will slip through your fingers. And that's kind of coming from a woman, is this reminder that no matter how hard masculine dominance crushes the feminine energy, it just kind of slips out and gets away and reforms itself. Now, that's not a justification. Don't misread that. It's just an advocation of the idea that it's not something we can stop, that there's this feminine energy has to persist. It's nature, and our nature requires it. And so I feel like we're on the dawn of a reemergence of the divine feminine in the way that we interact with each other, in the way that we live together. And that sort of leading this intuitive awakening that you're pointing to in your curiosity in your book. What I want to move the conversation to now is kind of the nature of money. Because one of the things you've grasped really well in your life was how it works, how to use it as a tool. I can see just by looking around you the fruits of that alchemy that you have with money. And now you've got enough of it to sort of bring you into a place where you can contemplate and think deeper. And that's a privilege that people like us in the West who have sufficient resources to think about these things, right? Clearly fiat currency is problematic. The idea that the issuance of debt as currency is a problem. Speaking just about monetary policy and the way we trade, what are your thoughts about how we fixed the way fiat currency works and the way that money works in our culture?
Sure. To respond to you, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. And if you look at kind of human consciousness, right, day-to-day awareness, everybody's God is money. That's just what it is. It reveals itself in our relationship to it. It reveals itself in how we construct our lives, whether through, survival necessity or through ambition. We work we work all of our waking hours. We rinse, repeat like robots. This is perceived as normal. Whether you have to do it or not, that's where you're expelling your energy. Okay, so that's something that I kind of want to point out, which a lot of people will kind of hear and say, that's just part of the deal. It's not part of the deal. It's a byproduct of the systemic structure of this paradigm, right? A little bit deeper, if you look at the way that this relationship kind of came into being, it obviously began with industrial capitalism, which I think got many of its kind of obviously there were great thinkers, great theorists, Adam Smith in particular, even some of the theorists behind liberalism, John Locke. But I mean, these guys were both very clear that these systems needed guardrails, right? And what has happened today is we have this globalist sort of capitalist model. And you go to institutions and they'll tell you, oh, globalism is great because it brings countries up and it brings it levels a playing field, it gives opportunity. But in truth, metaphysically, what the globalist model does is it really in a sort of like metastasis places capital so much higher up right? Where if you have a country, for example, that is in a capitalist economy, doing its things, it's honoring its people, it's honoring customs, it's working on certain commodities that are native to the land. What globalism does is it places capital above everything else at such an extreme, where multinational corporations can go to a country and say, look, here's the deal. We want to set up plants here, manufacturing facilities. We want to buy your cocoa, your sugar, right? But we're going to want these concessions. We don't want any deal. We don't want to deal with your environmental policies. We don't want And for a politician or for someone who's in power who wants to improve the local economy because it's been on the forefront of people's minds, right? The knee-jerk reaction is, oh, let's do it. So what do? They go to the IMF. They take out a loan that they can never repay. Then they're owned in many ways, right? When at an extreme level. But the point is that globalism removes the beauty and the culture from the land that they are now conducting business in, because they're not part of it. They're in some offshore structure, or they're domiciled elsewhere, right? This is the real metaphysical problem with the globalist model that is not talked about, but is known, in my opinion. Aside from that, there's a practical problem where, look what happened to the middle class in the United States when we gave everything to China, right? I mean, destroyed the heart and soul of this country. We were a manufacturing country, right? Some can say it's good, some can say it's worse, but in truth, it was part of this globalist agenda where it was the companies who benefited, not the citizens. So this is an important distinction to make. Capital in its current form, to your point, fiat currency is not sustainable. There's also, again, a metaphysical construct here. If you look at the way that the universe works, look at the way that nature works, it does not. There's no such thing as endless growth. This is an illusion. Through our current model, by virtue of how our central bank operates, whether it's through a 2% rate or otherwise, we operate with this illusion of constant, continuous, infinite growth. Nothing grows on a linear basis. Only our synthetic constructs do, that we've created to optimize, right? So this is something that, again, is often not looked at the way that I do, I think. And what happens is, again, when you have an infinite growth model underlying your inflation policies is, well, who does that benefit? Where is that power being given to? Well, it's given to people with equity, with assets, with money, because as they devalue the currency infinitely, those assets will go up. So again, supremacy is based on capital. And that is why in this economy, if you want to succeed, whether you're coming in on an entry-level position or you own a multinational corporation or a hedge fund, whatever it is, the gaze is always on the capital. The focus must always be, because that is the God. That is what reigns supreme, right? So, and again, everything is connected. This was well known, the illusion of separateness. Everything is connected. I can talk about that if you like. But in the same way that everything is connected, we don't realize that our currency cannot grow infinitely like that. And the way that we have ordered society and structured our lives to fit as this cog in a wheel, we cannot be stretched infinitely either, right? So to your point, and this isn't a woo-woo topic. This is very practical. Something has to give. The idea of karma in the universe is that there is a balance, there's a snapback, right? What we are going through right now, and it's impacting different people in different ways based on their, consciousness, based on their receptivity, based on the nature of their being, is we are facilitating the snapback. It happens consciously. It happens with our systems, because again, we embody the consciousness of these systems, right? So this is a natural rebalancing, a natural universal rebalancing of the rhythms of the universe. And this will materialize across the board. Now, there will be pushback, obviously. It will not happen naturally, but I don't believe that it will not happen. In fact, I know that it will, because guess what? You can set up all the synthetic systems that you want. You can put all the restrictions that you want. You can regulate, you can enact dogma, all that you want. There's no force more powerful than source. There's no force more powerful than universal order and rhythm. It will win every time. I mean, it might create carnage in the meanwhile. There might be wars, there might be destruction, there might be famine, but you can rest your hat on it. That's going to eventually happen. Just the way it works. So it's a matter. It's my desire, and I made it my goal to help fast track that effort, to give people a practical, hands-on, accessible understanding, and to show them that these esoteric concepts are not really esoteric. They're part of the everyday fabric of from your relationship with food, from your relationship with alcohol, from your relationship with your job. That there is a common thread that has been removed from consciousness. That was a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the bounty of having you to talk to. Like, it's a rich field to be in. Thank you for that. Greg, I'm conscious that I have a lot of the questions, so I'm going to ask again, and I'm just reminding myself that you're here and that I really love what you have to offer the conversations. But I want to sort of push back on something you said, Aaron, which is that about halfway through that last exposition, you said that there's no such thing as infinite growth. And I know that was in the context of a monetary system. I think that when we think about abundance and about the natural universe, there is infinite growth. What we don't take into account in terms of the way our system operates is the time after for decay. And the decay cycle is significant in the renewal of the next system of growth. And so we're accumulating dead things much faster than our natural phenomena can then reuse them in a way that's iterative. But when we look at the way, just 200 years ago, waste gets put in the soil, which brings us more food. And that was all happening in an infinite way. Right. And this is something that's usually attributed to, indigenous cultures who understood the seventh generation principle and understood that the velocity of consumption is the issue. And if I'd had said velocity of consumption to someone then, they would have not had any kind of sense of that. But in this context, that's really the idea, is that this pursuit of capital as the main effort of all of us, we've become consumers, and consumers consume, and that leads to greater things as waste. And what we're realizing is that there's a lot of danger in that around how much we can then recycle, i.e. the earth can reconfigure that waste into something that grows again, something that we can eat and have, and that provides oxygen in the atmosphere. And we're smart enough now that we're starting to notice this thing. The question I asked you, like what I'm seeing throughout your analysis and what I've read from your is that you've diagnosed the problem. But I'm really curious about is what you think the next levels are. What's the solutions? And so my question about money, I was literally not asking you about, what the next monetary thing would look like, but that was the subtext of what I'm offering. So how, if capital is the problem, how do we replace it? Or is it just a matter of civilization collapse and then we're back to trading fruit again?
No. Capital is not the problem. It's the supremacy of capitalism. And thank you for your statement before. It's linear infinite growth that is an illusion, right? In that linear model, there's no reciprocity. There's no regeneration. Again, bedrocks of universal order. Right. So yes, thank you for that clarification.
Well, if I made you president of the Treasury or the Fed, and you were going to enact an incredibly radical shift in U.S. monetary policy, what would you do?
Right. So if you made me the president of the Fed, I would first close the whole system. So that would be my first move, and then I wouldn't have a job.
Ban the Fed.
Okay. Absolutely.
Now we move you over to Treasury. You're in the Treasury. Fed's gone.
Absolutely. Central banking is the cancer of the world, and well documented. In fact, In fact, I'm sorry, I have to defend this, but
You don't. We're taking that as a given. I'm actually moving you into the iterative state again. Okay, we killed the Fed. Done. What's your next move as head of the Treasury?
Right. So let me kind of take this on a higher level, right? Because this shouldn't be germane to or relevant to just the United States, right? We have to realign and reorient our relationship with money, okay, with capital. Obviously, our current model doesn't work across a number of platitudes. But what we have to do is we have to create economies that are, again, existing in reality, existing in alignment with the universal order. Because also those same undercurrents and rhythms run through all of us, which most people don't understand, right? Like the breath, menstrual cycles. I mean, we're all part of this, kind of ecosystem, many ecosystems. So it's really quite simple. So first of all, the process through which things change and reform is not through override. It doesn't even begin first with, I'm talking about the actual real life, real world change. It starts with the individual. It starts with giving people a proper orientation to their real life, to their real existence, to unveiling truth that they haven't known, to incorporating that into the mainstream narrative, to incorporate that into the mainstream way of thinking. When you go up to somebody, I talk about the illusion of separation. In truth, we are all, again, sort of individual parts of source of the universe experiencing itself in unique form, right? So in that way, Greg is part of me, right? Mark is part of me. But when you go up to a person on the street, they're completely separate from you, right? You don't look at them as, you don't look at them as part of you. Nobody, most people don't, right? So it's about a reorientation on a very fundamental level, looking at people as they truly are. Physics tells us that we are just vibration and energy, right? We should be, when we're in conversation with people. So go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. So here's what I'm curious about, because Mark is asking about a very specific change.
Yeah, let me get there.
Because what comes to mind comes from a matriarch in my life where she said, sometimes you got to chop wood and fetch water. And I hear you keep moving to a higher place, and it remains very ethereal and academic. And let me
bring it back. Let me bring it back. So it's through that kind of reorientation, right? Looking at people as energy, as vibration, and then bringing that back into the fold, bringing that back to the way we structure systems. Again, it's about creating regenerative economies. It's about putting emphasis on local economy, not a globalist agenda. It's about incentivizing corporations through tax incentives to lock in deals that are accretive to, again, local business, local infrastructure, right? Where the value isn't on money. The value is on the citizen. The value is on what's going on. Sorry, go ahead.
So would you say, like, the Ford plant in Detroit, you incentivize them to stay in Detroit, and the populace of Detroit benefits from them being there?
Absolutely. And then the policy, the government policy, is accreted to that end as well. Now, obviously, there are fundamental things that have to take place with respect to wages, right? I mean, there's massive imbalance here. So a lot of reform has to take place, but it takes place when people truly believe it has to take place. Right now, people are just kind of like, what the F is going on? Like, why are things the way they are? Why are these people doing this? Well, because if you can, you will. And you will, because you don't have a proper orientation. You don't have a proper understanding of yourself in the world, right? I can go deeper on specific economic policy, but what I can say to you is that it starts with people on an individual level. The revolution, as you guys know, they say, will not be televised, and it won't, because it starts with each person reorienting themselves in the world. That will reverberate like a virus. That's how change happens, and it's step by step. But you would be surprised. Look how fast the COVID virus spread, right? Can I say that?
What I think is more important isn't the COVID virus itself, It was the world, the global reaction and action to that virus.
Sure,
that was amazing.
Yes, absolutely right, exactly. So I mean, look, this sort of a change, this sort of awakening will not take place with the same mainstream media support, obviously, but the point is that it will take place because there's nowhere else for us to go, and maybe all my ideas won't be incorporated, but there will be ideas that align with what I'm thinking, that align with the natural rhythms of the universe, because all of these practical discussions, right, become linked to these more metaphysical ideas, because these ideas are part of our reality. We've been disconnected from it.
Yeah, science's use of our ability to temporarily break with the fundamental laws of the universe and suspend them, our ability to make magic, if you will, manifest, has allowed us to kind of put barriers between ourselves and the natural laws, but that's unsustainable. And what I'm hearing you say is that the integration arises from the individual first. And you use the COVID idea to say this, like when people's will forces align, then the outward world shifts, and it can shift quickly. And it's
especially in this age, we've never had the instruments before than what we have in this age through social media, through communications. And this is why I am completely bullish on this transformation taking form. I will also, if you want me to give you a couple more, examples in my mind about, real economic reform that should be taking place, or at least our vantage point to economy, I can gladly do that. So you kind of tell me. And I know Greg. I know Greg really wanted me to get deeper there.
Well, what I want to do is ask you the flippant question, because I think that might help. But I'm calling it out because it's not really a reflection of my beliefs.
Do it.
But if capital is the problem, what are you? Some kind of communist? We know communism doesn't work either, and socialism is an abstract idea that's only takes and retransfers wealth to the masses, but it stifles innovation and makes people lazy. Like that's one of the things I'm driving at here. Is like, what is the thing that's going to catch fire? What's the thought that's going to get us past this whole communist, capitalist, socialist triality and into the new world, the new way?
Thank you for asking it directly. So this is an important misnomer that is peddled all over the place. And again, this is a problem with I think, the binary nature of people's minds. But the answer is not socialism. The answer is not communism. I am a capitalist. I'm a capitalist. And capitalism is not inherently bad, because at its core, it's just a tool, right? It's a tool. It's a system of exchange that is shaped by the values we bring to it, right? If we shape capitalism, we make it, rooted in care, in mutual respect, in presence, right, in awareness. It can absolutely coexist with more sacred balance and way of being, right? Under a, let's say, blended capitalist model. The end goal isn't just to maximize profits, right? It's also to offer something meaningful, right? To contribute to the well-being of society, to build with aesthetic in mind, to not just, if you're building an apartment building, it's not all about dollars and cents and squeezing everything out and squeezing margins. It's about caring about how it looks. It's about caring about the message that it's giving you. I mean, look at ancient architecture. This is how they built. You look at the intricate detail. Look at the Giza pyramid. Its orientation to the north. It's telling a story. It's giving meaning. Look at the ways just buildings in metropolitan cities were once built with whether it's gargoyles or statues of gods, or right there was value was placed on the deed itself, on the doing itself. It wasn't just placed on the profit that it spit out, right? It's about that public kind of a reorientation, right? Public interest, Right,
Right.
exactly.
In the original doctrine around corporations being able to be a corporation to raise funds was the idea that it was going to last for 5 years and then you had to stop. And that the only reason you were allowed to do it was there was a leading public interest that was served by your company gathering funds in that way. And we got hypnotized and got into this place where it became the thing was to have the shares to trade, and then the trading of the shares became the way that the money was generated, and that's an abomination. That's the cancerous aspect of what you're talking about. So one institutional shift would be to make it so that you couldn't actually have shares beyond a period of time, like the original corporate laws required. Like it was a 5-year window. And then at that point, everybody who owned shares was a partner and owned equity in the actual material of the factory or of the thing. And that was what you got, right? And if it didn't work and there wasn't any reason for it to benefit the public anymore, then it went away.
So, something like that. Absolutely. I mean, it's along the same lines, right? It's, it just needs to be reimagined. It needs to be, remembered. There needs to be a focus on anything from, like ethical investing to regenerative farming to businesses that have these, higher levels of awareness in mind. They actually care for other people who you think are separate from you, but are in truth part of who you are, right? So again, but you don't get there unless you have a proper orientation to the world around you. You just don't.
If we're thinking of divinity as the whole, thinking of the capitalist system, is debt a part of that whole? Is that a divine aspect to capitalism?
Absolutely not. In fact, this is my problem with inflation, right? Because inflation just perpetuates this problem. And this is part of the growth for the sake of growth model, the linear infinite growth, right? You accumulate debt. I think the world is like over 300 trillion in debt. Our country is 36 trillion debt. We have all of the resources we could ever want and need to live. Everybody, right? We manufacture scarcity in this capitalist model. We are operating under a corrupt capitalist model. The capitalist model, again, can be tweaked according to our consciousness, and it will have to happen because we know that the socialist model is even more flawed because you've got people. I mean, our government is completely corrupt. So it's actually kind of like part of their job. Like it's kind of like, oh, you get to go into office, you're paid not that much, but the perks are you get paid off by lobbyists and special interests. Like that's the deal.
You're right.
That's just accepted.
Going back to Mark's question to you, like you're in the seat of decision regarding economics. Is part of your revolution of the system to erase all debt?
No, debt is important. That is an important part of economic growth. There's no two ways about it. But the current model is not sustainable. The current model is not even healthy. It needs to be re-understood. It needs to be restructured. Go ahead.
So I'm just curious. Like you just spoke to the immense amount of debt this world is holding. I don't know. Like you could put a stopgap on it right now, but you're still have this tsunami of debt that's going to wash over, it seems like, any attempts to naturalize capitalism.
I don't agree. I don't necessarily agree. I think that, first of all, if let's look at who owns U.S. Treasury bonds. Right. Certainly not all of the owners of U.S. Treasury would be against this kind of reimagination. Yes, there are foreign entities that own it, but who are their interests aligned with? Do they want to play in the U.S. economy, in the game? Right. Like, what is it? 15% of outstanding U.S. debt is owned by foreign sovereign. What's that? I
think Japan owns like 15% of our.
I think it's or maybe it's 35%. I've got to recheck the numbers, but the point is there is a very easy way to adjust. And by the way, the United States, when we have these massive capital expenditures, it is financial abuse. It is generational abuse. And we're not expending for the sake of good. We're expending in many ways to enrich NGOs, to to push Western hegemony on other countries, right? To, brainwash or to push agenda, right? This is part of policy, right? Why are we cutting checks to, the country of Syria to enforce transgender rights, whatever these programs were doing? I mean, it's absurd. So
it's so funny how this happens, where I would highly doubt that any one of us in this conversation voted for the current president. Yet in this moment, we're actually talking about something that happened under his leadership, which is the dismantling of the funky parts of USAID, and that there's a benefit that's achieved as a result of doing that. And that we have to stop just throwing money at things and throwing debt at things and get on with the idea of, does this make sense from a human point of view, and that being our standard. Now, here's back to what Greg was talking about. If we decided on September 1st that we were going to have a global jubilee and all debt that had been issued would be immediately wiped off the face of the books, mortgages and anything, we would all still be sitting exactly where we're sitting in that moment with the assets we have. And then we would start from that point without all that interest owed to someone else. And so all of those institutions would have to recreate their valuation in the cultural context, in the social context. So theoretically, based on this crazy idea of a one-day jubilee where we reset the whole thing all at once.
That can't happen. That doesn't happen.
Well, I gather that it can't, in the sense of it's not practical. But if it could, would it break society, or would we reinvent society closer to the way that you're thinking?
One-day jubilee, society probably breaks.
And what does that look like? What does a broken debt system look like?
Interestingly enough, the common man, the average person, I don't think breaks. It's the structure of economy that exists that average man, lives off of, right? That where they're deriving their, income from. Right, that's what breaks, and it's about how that reverberates and how that model is restructured. But again, immediately, they're not going to be impacted enough, kind of in the same way that although that's not necessarily true, because I'm making a lot of assumptions in the back of my mind as to kind of like the impact on the companies that common man was working for. I'm not familiar with, the kind of like the percentage of people working in local businesses and the amount of debt those businesses have. So, but the point is, it can't happen with the flick of a switch. It can't. There's too much of a structure. But the bottom line is that nothing happens with a flick of a switch, and nothing should happen with a flick of a switch. It should happen on a step-by-step basis where we look at, without greed and power and corruption being our only lens, where we look at, how this benefits economy, how this benefits sustainability, how this benefits regeneration, how this will impact, our great grandchildren, right? Something that I would like to kind of jump into here, which I think is important because it's a big misnomer, is this idea of artificial intelligence. And I won't go there unless I didn't answer something.
No, it's an open conversation. Bring it up.
All right, cool.
Let's kick it around.
So I think the biggest misnomer with artificial intelligence is that it is the evolution of consciousness, of human consciousness. It is the biggest lie. It is, and it only shows us how limited our understanding of intelligence is. Right? We view intelligence under this current construct, right? Which is, again, literally cutting off part of our cutting off our intuition, cutting off the sophistication of how we combine, relationality. I mean, there's a sophistication here, but certainly a system that mimics, sort of robotic thought, the overextension of the masculine, the computational, data-driven. This is only one half of the story. This does not output intelligence, real human intelligence. Real human intelligence is far more sophisticated than that. Again, this, Mark, is a byproduct of the same scientific materialist paradigm. It still bleeds into many parts of our society and our consciousness, right? And you have these titans of industry, these technology executives, AI, the guys pushing it, and it shows that this lack of awareness, this unconsciousness, it's not class-based. It transcends everything. The same people who are, people want to point fingers and they want to play victim and they want to talk about conspiracy theory. The same people that are billionaires are the same people that are operating under the same sleep that everybody else is. They are just as unaware. They are good at understanding the system and then rising within it, but they're still operating in the same capacity. It's just a different representation.
They're still
right?
drunk on the same fiscal heroin.
Exactly.
And what you're saying is that we can't quit cold turkey. We've got to come up with some kind of methadone.
Right. And absolutely. But also just very quickly, if you look at the way that, again, artificial intelligence is being heralded, or how it's being pushed, it's the same dominant power structures, right? It's the same industrialists, the military, sovereign nations. And then there's actually an interesting comment by I think it was Mark Zuckerberg and somebody else, but I forget was it. These guys were talking about the problems, the concerns with how fast it's developing. And then one guy said, but I don't want to stop because the other guy might get ahead of me. It's like, are you out of your mind? Like, who cares? If you're worried about artificial intelligence running rampant out of control, none of this is relevant. But this is, by the way, this is a
microcosm of what's wrong with the way development works, exactly. The way innovation works. So what I flashed on is, what if we could take a bunch of great women engineers and help them build the biggest possible data center and train the AI the way they wanted? Wait. Let me finish, Greg. Would that feminism of artificial intelligence change anything?
Wait, hold on a second, because I want to call bullshit on that, because the feminine is involved. Everyone's involved with AI now. The AI team that my son is a part of, I would say at least half, if not more, of the people on it are women. And just the product itself is for everybody. Everyone's interacting with it. It is being created wholly by humanity.
Also, these forces exist. The masculine and feminine exists within a man, within a woman, within whatever somebody wants to identify as. So it's just about how they manifest in the individual.
Yeah, what I heard, Mark, is you compartmentalizing feminism.
For sure. Just like I asked the last question, I took it from a kind of an extreme point of view, and I knew when I did it that it was a ludicrous thing in a sense. But one of the things that I'm curious about is that we make excuses and for all of the masculine, male-dominated realities of this culture that are leading this. And we've identified scientific materialism as suffering from this. We've also got a lot of women and womanists who are recognizing there's this inherent issue with our culture. And so my thought was, well, if we take the model, we have these things in mythology, like in the Black Panther comic books, we have Wakanda. And in Wonder Woman, we have the Amazonians, right? And they evolve these societies separately from whatever the oppressive force is. And my thought was, well, if we unleash the oppressed force, if we imbue our thinking and imbue our industrialization with this missing piece, this Sophia, for lack of a better word, what happens? Do we somehow bring ourselves closer to what it is we're all yearning for, this more integrated, more evolved, awakened self. Because if we recognize that patriarchy, and I'm just using that as the broad term for masculine drunkenness, is abated, and we fill it back up with the thing that is its opposite, is that going to help us? Well, not necessarily, because it might just be the toxic version of something else. But it's right now, I defy either one of you to name a single female who's built a data center and an AI. I can name 3 males who are industrialists. And so my point was, those 3 males, if they were countered by industrialist females who had a different sensibility that was informed by a different kind of consciousness, an estrogen-based thinking, if you will, could that shift the way that the machine intellect is being applied to our social structures? It's a ludicrous idea. I'm sure.
I agree with that, and also there could be women who are even more overextended masculine than a man. I mean, it's not like not necessarily, you're not necessarily getting the extreme with a man. You could get.
All right, well, let's
theoretically.
I get it. I'll concede that. I'm going to interrupt
very quickly. It's not just the problem is not just the overextended masculine and the suppressed feminine. There are many other imbalances that we have in this world, many other perversions, many other distortions. So it's multifaceted. It's not so simple, right? That's important.
Yeah. So if we look at the history of cultures before Roman Catholicism, Wiccan cultures, other indigenous cultures where medicine was very much part of the group, and women spent a lot of time working with different tinctures, we had a powerful female healing force in a lot of cultures. And it's been suppressed in our culture right now. And what we see is women dominate the nursing role and men dominate the doctor role. And the women are good at that for a reason. And when we're in a hospital bed, we want feminine nurturing to help heal us. So there's this recognition of these laws that goes with some of these ideas. Like there is a truth to counterbalance patriarchy and masculine intoxicated scientific materialism. We do need some of the energies that come with that. And
I'm just playing devil's advocate. Yeah.
No. Well, yeah. I see it as we're playing human advocate, because we've got to parse these issues. Together, we come together. What I took from what you said before was that if I change my relationship to whether I will take on more debt, or I change my relationship to what kinds of foods I eat, or what kinds of products I buy, that will begin to cascade throughout the whole economic system, because we saw that with the rise of Whole Foods, right? Not the company, but the idea. There's way more gluten-free stuff now than there's ever been. There's way more organic vegetables in places in America, because when we decide that we're going to be discerning about what we allow in our sphere of influence, that's when change propagates, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, because of the nature of this paradigm and this glorification of capital, that is one way to, override the beast with the individual. You fight back with your wallet. You don't buy from a company that runs sweatshops in Bangladesh. You don't buy snack food from a company that packs it with carcinogens and artificial flavors. You don't support, this or that. Like people don't get to complain about Jeff Bezos and then buy half their stuff from Amazon. It just doesn't work like that, right? It has to be part of their daily life. It has to be part of their daily routine. And by the way, companies have unique ways of overriding and skirting these sort of quote unquote uprisings, if you will. Look at what happened in the tobacco space, right? Where they bought Kraft and they bought Nabisco, and they basically took the same addiction based methodologies and they applied it to our foods, right? So they got creative and that allowed them to expand their business. But the point is that people are not aware of this. But if everybody in the mainstream, right, if on all the major networks came out tomorrow and they said, if you eat food from Frito-Lay or Pepsi, you will get autoimmune disease, you will get cancer, you will get, I mean, if they just made these declarations, not everybody is going to change their habits, right? It's not going to happen, right? But it would think about the shift that would happen. Think about what, again, when people are aware, when people are living in truth with knowledge, that's what pushes people. That's how it works.
I think what, for me personally, and we all three of us has said it in this conversation, it comes back to me and simply said, the man in the mirror. And just yesterday, I noticed I had this banner against Google that I've been holding on for over a decade. And it's that trope of how they gave up their motto to not do evil. And but here's the thing that I found out yesterday. They changed it to do the right thing. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I just took that linear thing, that very finite thing, and I used it as a banner of fuck you. And yesterday I learned, oh, actually, I agree with their statement. And it reminded me of Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing, which is very convoluted. I think he in a very human way, showed a grounded element of what we've been talking about for over an hour. Of sometimes it's really hard to know what the right thing is. And sometimes that environment and history of an individual is determining their choice of right thing.
Yeah, but it's not, would you agree, Greg, that it's not so hard to discern what evil is?
Well, I would say it isn't. And for me personally, it's if a choice and action is blessing everyone involved, that's divine. That's source. If anyone's suffering from a choice or an action, that is not source.
But if you're intentionally hurting somebody, that's evil, right?
Yeah, but I think even more, of course that's abhorrent, but even more subtle is our unconsciousness that is hurting people. For instance, you just spoke about the sweatshops in Bangladesh. I'm betting that all three of us have a cell phone. There's plenty of individuals who are suffering so that the three of us carry a cell phone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And guess what? We can all do better.
Yeah.
And I aspire to every single day.
God, that brings tears to my eyes.
Well, and what's happening is we're all coming to, and I'll invite everyone listening or watching to come to the awareness that doing better is a result of us connecting with each other, being more compassionate, being willing to listen, and being willing to do something to shift our own behavior incrementally over time, getting better at it. And we're all in this together. So when someone's feeding you a message of hate or of sequestration of a certain class of people, you don't have to buy in. You don't have to be mad at the boomers. You don't have to be mad at Republicans. You don't have to be mad at bodybuilders, whatever trope you want to pick.
And I would say you don't have to be mad at Trump, at Bezos, these easy targets for people.
Be the change, in the words of Gandhi, right? And we're all grappling with how to do that. And we're all learning. And I think, Aaron, just to wrap this up, one of the things that's true about the work that you're doing, the writing you're doing, your podcast, is that there's an inherent call to action in that, to take radical responsibility for yourself and to seek out the next iteration of human evolution that it's actually waiting for us to claim. And it seems like it's out of reach or that the oppressive forces are going to win, but that's propaganda. That's a hypnotic spell that's being cast upon us. And that through people like you and others and this podcast, we're slowly coming to the awareness that community is the solution, that finding a way to coexist and create together as opposed to me, mine, doesn't do that. I'm going to just to say thank you and bring us close to wrapping this up. Say the name of the book that's coming out again.
The Fifth Evolution.
And we'll link to that if there's anything available about that on your website. What's the name of the podcast as well?
The Evolved Podcast.
And if someone wants
with Aaron Scott, because for me it's hard to search for that.
Yeah, the Evolved Podcast with Aaron Scott. If someone wants to get a hold of you and appoint you as Treasury, how do they do that?
I would ask that they contact you, Mark, and you'll act as my agent if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. But really, if someone does want to get a hold of you to like have you on a podcast or be on your podcast, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I've got links on my webpage, theaaronscott.com. I think I have links also in my like in the actual like Apple or Amazon, Spotify, that they can hit me up if they'd like.
Got it. Cool. DMs. All right. Well, I'll leave it to Greg to ask the final question of our episode.
All right. So it's theaaronscott.com. And Aaron, really thank you for your time and your generosity on this ride. It was beautiful. We do have a tradition for a final question. And as Mark likes to say, we take it very seriously. Eminem or Foo Fighters?
Foo Fighters.
Yeah, that was quick. How come?
Absolutely. I resonate more with that kind of music.
All right. Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much. I wish you the very best with the endeavor you have on your plate and your continued awakening. I think we could have gone all day. And there is this element of when dealing with the infinite, it really can go on and on and on. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. And we'll talk maybe after I get this book out, and we can talk more about it on an iterative level.
Absolutely. Always an open garage door for another ride.
Great.
Recording stopped.